So is Sauron going to be the next busted card in Marvel Snap? I don't think so, but we're going to talk about it in this video because it's finally time for a card review of this month's upcoming new cards. I'm a few days behind on this one. We've had Zabu decks and patch teasers and all these other things to get through, but I finally had a moment to sit down and do a card review. So we're going to talk about the 4 upcoming cards this month, kicking it off with the first one, Sauron, and then going forward in order each week for the next reveal. This is going to be a new 3 cost, 3 power card with an on reveal effect. Remove the abilities from all ongoing cards in your hand and deck. So this is going to be a great way to basically silence off all of those negative effects you might have in your deck. Cards that might come to mind immediately for that are things like Red Skull or Typhoid Mary. Currently, these are played in decks utilizing the card 0, which can target one of those, the next one you play, and silence off its effect. But Sauron here is actually going to just do it across all of the cards in your hand and deck. So in particular, I think this could be really great on turn 3 because there are some of those big turn 4 plays like the Typhoid Mary, maybe even an Atuma is something I've seen in these decks as well. So that perfect on curve line 3 into 4, and then, you know, your Red Skull on 5 is still there as well. And it's nice that this hits both hand and deck. So it's, you know, even if you top deck the Red Skull late, he's already going to come in perfectly silenced for you. Now, I've seen some conversation on this card around things like Electro, for instance, like, oh, hey, you can play Electro and get his on reveal, and then the negative ongoing aspect will be silenced. But read this very carefully. I don't think that will work because this removes the abilities. And typically when we see that, that means all of the abilities, not just specifically the ongoing one. So it's targeting ongoing cards, but removing all abilities. So you would also be removing the on reveal aspect of Electro as well. So I don't think there's any shenanigans there. I've also seen some quick thoughts about, hey, what if you try to use this in a Patriot deck to make all of your cards non-ability cards to be enabled by Patriot? And yes, I do think that would be possible if you play your Patriot down first, because remember, if your Patriot is in hand or deck, Sauron's going to silence off that Patriot effect. He is an ongoing card, so you need to have the Patriot down first. I think that creates a little bit of awkwardness where this might be tough. Patriot on 3, Sauron on 4, you're already off curve a little bit, and you don't have a whole lot of time to realize any benefit. So I don't think there's any sneaky shenanigans necessarily with a Patriot line in this one particularly. I think you're going to have to play it more straight up for those negative ongoing style cards, of which there are already a few, and that's an archetype that works pretty well currently in Marvel Snap, especially with cards like Shuri to enable those. And because Sauron's only targeting ongoing cards specifically, something like Shuri is completely fine to keep in your deck. She is not an ongoing card, so her effect is still going to work while you're still setting up for those big payoff doubled Red Skulls and so much on turn 5 without, you know, having to weave in a 0. So this might just be additional upside for those decks. Right now, the Red Skull gets so big, they don't really care too much about the negative aspect of the Red Skull, but this might be a free way to disable that without really sacrificing too much mid-game power play. 3 for 3 is not exciting by any means, but might be worth it in the long run if you're saving, you know, 8 on your Red Skull later, for instance. So all in all, this is a really intriguing card for a proven archetype. I think that's a good sign. I think it's going to slot in fairly well. I don't think it's going to make the deck crazy stronger. This is not going to be some awesome new build around like Zabu has been, for instance, that opens up so many different things. I think this is just a good card in a good deck, and that's about what we should expect from Sauron. Maybe not too much crazy more. So moving on here to the next week's new card, we've got Shanna the She-Devil, a new 4-cost, 2-power card on reveal. Add a random 1-cost card to each location. So a card that's great at going wide into the board with 4 units in play here. You get Shanna, and then you get a 1-cost at each location. I'm assuming that includes her own based on this wording. So if you have things like a Khazar buff coming in to buff all of those units, it could be quite a bit of stats. Blue Marvel as well loves when cards go wide on board, so you get more and more stuff to absorb all of those extra power buffs for those wide board buffing cards. So you can see a couple lines here in those zoo sorts of decks, just getting a lot of bodies down and getting stats in play. Now, that said, of course, Shanna is introducing a lot of chaos here, because these aren't just fixed things. You know, Squirrel Girl gets you 3 bodies, but you know exactly what you're getting. Ultron, late in the game, you get a bunch of bodies, but you know exactly what you're getting. And sometimes it's great to build synergies off of those. Particularly, you know, you've got like Patriots, great for Ultron and Squirrel Girls. And you've got the Blue Marvels of the world too, don't really care as much, but it's nice to know what your exact values are going to be. If I put 4 drones in this lane off Ultron, I know exactly how much power I'm going to have. I can make great decisions based on that, you know. So not only is it surprising, but I have full information. I can snap carefully, can win my cubes. Shanna's going to be chaotic. You don't know exactly what you're going to get. Now, I'm not saying you're always playing this on turn 6 and making key snapping decisions right then, but sometimes you're going to get things that backfire. You're going to hit a blade that discards a card from your hand and screws you up. And sometimes you're going to hit an Ebony Maw that locks down a location that you maybe needed to commit a little more power to. You might not be super sad to get 7 power. Maybe that's an advantage in some cases, but other times it might be a real limiter. And essentially the unpredictability there is going to make it a little bit hard to play around Shanna. And ultimately the average power she provides is not particularly excessive. In other words, if you're getting 3 1-cost cards on average, those are going to be about 2 power plus the 2 power from Shanna. That's kind of a 4-cost, 8 power play, but with a bunch of risk and chaos introduced. I don't know that the upside here is going to be worth all of the risk that you're taking on with Shanna, in particular for really synergistic plays like Kazar, for instance. You can't play them both at the same time, so you might be floating some energy. Things could get a little bit awkward. If you have enough 1-drops, of course, you can flex in on turn 5 and fix that a little bit. Now, you know, if you do have the perfect like Zabu, Kazar, Shanna, yeah, you've got some 4-drops to synergize with Zabu. That's probably where the design for this card is coming in with all of these different Savage Land style characters. So I do see that line, but I still don't think it's going to offer as much consistency or power output as just other good 4-cost cards in that world. Because at the end of the day, your board spots are valuable, and Shanna's going to be occupying them with random stuff that's hard to control. I think you might be better off building a deck that can utilize those with some reliability and consistency instead. So I'm curious to see this one. Will this make the cut in a zoo deck? I don't think that's a crazy notion. If you just need cards that add enough stuff to play and you have enough wide board buffs, this probably makes the cut. Do I think this is going to be a star? Do I think this is going to like redefine zoo decks or be the thing you're building towards or building around? I don't think so. I think there's too much inconsistency here. So a promising card, a playable card, I suspect, but not one anybody's going to be losing their mind over for sure. So moving on here, we've got Dazzler. This is a little bit of a synergy card perhaps with Shanna, a 4-cost, 4-power card. It says ongoing if you have 4 cards at each location plus 6 power. So this is another one that obviously benefits from you going really wide into play, making sure every spot is occupied. And then at the end of it, you're going to get a 4/10, which of course is a little overstated for a 4-cost. Most of the 4 costs with conditions land around 4/8 or so, 4/9. 4/10's big. That's at a Tuma or like Namor stat line, about as big as we get really for 4-cost units. That said, it's not excessive, right? It's not like crazy. We have other ways to get 4-cost things that turn into 10 power. So you know, it's good, it's rewarding, but it's not above the level of other cards, in which case, yet again, this becomes a conversation about opportunity cost. You know, what am I actually going to run in my deck? Would I rather just have a 4/8 that I know is going to work more reliably, that I have more control over, that's not susceptible to removal or board limitations? Because remember, any location that prevents you from playing stuff or locks down spots, any play from your opponent that, you know, Professor X prevents you from playing a card, okay, Dazzler's now just a 4/4, and there's nothing I can do about it, right? This has a little bit less influence than something like a Rescue or a Jessica Jones, where you have perhaps more control over the result. Again, that makes this card a bit risky. You're introducing some concerns here for actually satisfying this condition reliably, not to mention it's all in on this singular game plan. Now, of course, with cards like Shanna, we talked about Ultron, just regular zoo decks playing swarms of 1-cost cards, Squirrel Girls, Mysterios, etc. There's plenty of ways to fill up your board. That's not necessarily a difficult thing to do. It's just one that has some built-in conditionality that's occasionally going to fail, and your 4-drop is therefore going to fail. I could still see, you know, a Zabu deck that's running Shanna and Kazar and Dazzler and a bunch of 1s, and that's the kind of payoff trio you've got there, all synergizing around Zabu together. That makes some sense to me as a zoo build, but ultimately, I don't think the 10 power upside here is so significant or so awesome that it is, again, going to be worth the risk for most decks. It's going to be hard to satisfy this sometimes. And then it's a 4/4 that's pretty disappointing. I suspect most decks, even if they're running some sort of Zabu discount package for their 4s, they're going to prefer something they have more control over as opposed to Dazzler, which is going to fail fairly often. So again, you know, playable, probably has a deck out there in that zoo world that makes sense, just not a star sort of card. So next up here we have Shadow King, a new 6-cost card. This guy looks cool, this like crazy demon shadow thing in the background. 6 cost, 4 power. He has an on reveal, set all cards here to their original base power. So this is a big power reset. If your opponent has played a bunch of stuff that got crazy buffed, then Shadow King can reset those stats. So there's the obvious stuff like Angela and Bishop, for instance, that just get bigger and bigger throughout the course of the game. No, I'm taking you guys back to 0 and 1. There's stuff like Carnage, for instance, that eats a bunch of minions. You go, no, Carnage, you're not 8 power, you're 2, dude. And, you know, Shadow King both swings 6 power away from Carnage and adds 4 to the board. It's a pretty big swing, right? And any other buffs I might have next to it, same story. Now, do keep in mind that if this works the same way Valkyrie works currently, which sets the power of cards to 3, this will not matter for ongoing cards. That ongoing text line will constantly update itself. It's basically a persistent effect. So if you, for instance, have a Devil Dinosaur, Shadow King will set the Devil Dinosaur to 3, but the Devil Dinosaur just updates in real time because of its ongoing effect and jumps right back up. That's what happens when you Valkyrie a Devil Dino. He stays big. I assume the same will happen with Shadow King. So you can't use this as an answer to all ongoing card buffs, the Devil Dinos, the Morbius, whatever it may be. Those are going to just jump right back up. Of course, if you have something like an Iron Man that has been Mr. Negatived to a 0/5 and you use Shadow King on it, yes, that's going to go back to 0. That's great. If the buff is coming from somewhere other than the ongoing effect itself, yeah, that's perfect. But for those who are getting these stats from the ongoing effect, this just isn't going to make a difference. Now, that said, how effective is this card going to be? This one's a little bit hard to read because keep in mind, this is your 6-cost card. You're committing your entire final turn to it. And sometimes that's going to be great. It's going to be swingy. It's going to win you a location, but it is pretty locked in on one spot, and it's only good in these exact reactive scenarios. There's a lot of situations where this is just going to completely whiff. Patriot decks, you're going to reset them down, and then Patriot's just going to buff them right back up. The big Devil Dinosaur decks of the world, it's not going to work. If your opponent's just playing raw big stats, they drop a Death or an Infinite or a She-Hulk or whatever, this card's not going to have an impact. So I don't think this is really all that reliably swingy against that many portions of the meta. This might be one of those things we see that pops in when certain decks come to the forefront, and you know, if Angela and Bishop are really big, then yeah, Shadow King or cards similar to those, Shadow King will make an impact. But I think there will be lots of metas where this just doesn't hit often enough. It's like, okay, 1 out of 4 games, this is really good, but I need a 6-drop that's hitting all the time. I need it to be really, really reliable. Or if you have some way to benefit your own cards with Shadow King, if there's some reason you've debuffed your cards, you want to buff them back up or something, which I don't know if anything like that exists right now in the meta, but that could be a different reason around Shadow King that we haven't seen yet based on future card releases. Kind of tuck that in the back of your mind and consider it for later. Right now, Valkyrie is really good at that because Valkyrie is setting their cost to 3, so you can take small stuff and make it bigger, which can be awesome. Shadow King doesn't just automatically make things bigger or equalize stats like Valkyrie. So to me, in a lot of ways, Shadow King is like a more conditional, less consistent, and perhaps even more expensive because he's 6 versus 5 play than Valkyrie, all of which, I think Valkyrie's often going to provide the same utility as Shadow King with fewer downsides. Honestly, she'll work more often in more scenarios. So this card looks hard to me. I know there are ways to use this, but I think most decks are going to want to run things that are more proactive, just big stat dumps themselves, or have a more reliable answer. So Shang-Chi's, Valkyries, Enchantresses, and stuff can all do similar sorts of things to Shadow King, but have more flexibility baked in as well. So yeah, this card, again, maybe not my absolute favorite. Now, I have to say, like, I think Sauron's going to be a pretty good fit for his deck. The rest of these are okay. I'm not saying they're unplayable. Most cards in Marvel Snap are playable, of course, if you If you want to toss them in, they aren't going to hurt you too much. But I don't think they're the highest power, most exciting cards we've seen yet from new stuff in Marvel Snap. I think the last batch of Series 5, although bigger, had more good, meaty build-arounds and really deck driving sorts of plays, whereas these are more complementary, more secondary. They kind of fill in a deck more than really drive it forward. So in other words, I don't expect these to be huge priorities moving forward when it comes to the token shop. Now that said, of course, you shouldn't listen to me. I'm an idiot. Everybody's an idiot right now because nobody's seen these cards get played. Maybe they're way better than we're expecting. Maybe they have some great fits we're not envisioning. Maybe the average power output for Shanna is actually really high. Anyone who buys a card in the token shop because a streamer said it was good, they are dumb. The streamer's dumb and the person buying the card. Don't buy cards based on streamers. Use your token shop very carefully. Try to find data on various websites if you can. Collect multiple opinions, average them out, and also just look for cards that look really fun for you and fit your collection well. So don't use this advice for any big decisions. Ignore me. Wait these cards out. This is more about prompting discussion, coming up with cool ideas, getting a little bit of a picture in our head of what's possible, and then of course waiting for that reality and all of that coming to fruition to see what's actually going to work well. That said, pretty excited about Sauron. I got some cool decks planned for that one. The rest of these are going to take some figuring out, I think, to make cool and make work. So as we tend to do in Hearthstone, I wanted to give some star ratings for these cards, locking in my predictions for how good I think they're going to be, so you can all come back later and make fun of me and say, Regis gave this card 2 stars. He's a fool. But I wanted to lay down a really rough scale. So 4 stars are like awesome build around cards. They're driving the meta. They're absolutely amazing. 3 stars are going to be cards that are getting played pretty often. They're parts of good decks, but maybe not like the build around thing. Just, you know, included, important, you know, but not the star of the deck. 2-star cards are going to be things that show up very rarely and occasionally, so they can be run in pet decks if you have them in your collection, but you know, they're not going to be commonly seen. And 1-star cards are essentially the unplayable stuff we almost never see in Marvel Snap. Think about cards like M'Baku or Crystal. I know Crystal has been toyed with a little bit in Zabu decks, but historically, Crystal's been what I would consider a 1-star card. So that said, 1 to 4 stars, I'm going to give each of these cards a quick star rating. Sauron is a 3-star card. Shanna the She-Devil is a 3-star card. Dazzler is a 2-star card. Shadow King is a 2-star card. And just to give you an idea, I think Zabu is a 4-star card. So share your thoughts on these cards below. Did I miss some awesome synergy? Is there some crazy broken thing that you think is going to be amazing? Am I just undervaluing the stats of Shanna or Dazzler? Are they going to be awesome? Is Shadow King going to have some perfect meta scenario I'm not seeing? I want to hear all that and more in the comments below. Love reading everybody's takes on new cards. So that said, thanks for watching, thanks for commenting, and until next time, game on.